So who is the speaker with beard of gray opening up Power Hour today? He's great at writing copy that converts, from long landing pages to short form adverts. It's 43 Clicks' specialist content creator. Ladies and gents, I give you Will Slater.
Here we go. Okay. So Maurice has told you about how today is all going to be about creative. I'm going to start off by talking about copywriting, just to mix it up a bit. And I'm going to throw some stuff in about there about how you can work with your creatives and how it's so important that the two things work together. So initially, this talk was going to be a list of useful tips about how to write better copy. The kind of stuff that anybody can use, whatever you're writing, whether it's adverts, landing pages, blogs, emails, whatever, useful writing tips. But that seemed a little bit boring and a little bit bland. So one night, I was sat reading a book to my daughter, The Gruffalo. And it's a brilliant book. And it got me thinking, oh, that's not right. No, there's me. There we go. It got me thinking, any of the things that make this book so brilliant, do they transfer to copy? Does it work? Does it make any sense? And I sat down the next day, because I couldn't really talk about it with my 5-year-old, and I started making some notes. And actually, I came up with a list of about 20, I think I've got to now, of things that you can learn from the Gruffalo about copywriting. I'm not going to give you 20 today. I could not fit it into 20 minutes. I've cut it down to 10. It might fit into 20 minutes. It might not. Whether it's any good, I'm going to let you be the judge of that at the end. Come and tell me. So tip number 1, let's get started. Put that down. And this is one of my favorite ones, and it's something that people maybe don't know about a lot of the time. When you're writing your copy, so the Gruffalo, just in case you haven't read it, I'll give you a quick. It's about a monster called the Gruffalo, but it's not really about the Gruffalo. It's about a little mouse, and this little mouse goes through the wood, and it defeats all these bigger creatures, a fox and an owl and a mouse, and the Gruffalo using its wits. It's solving problems. Brilliant. And that's something we like to do as marketers. We talk about the problems that our customers, our prospects have, and how whatever it is we're trying to sell, our products, solves those problems, right? It's pretty standard. We all do it. But there's a problem with using problems. And that problem is, if you tell someone they've got a problem, if you tell them they're doing something wrong, it's not a very nice thing to hear. If somebody came up to me after this talk or in the middle of this talk and said, Will, talk was good, but what was all that nonsense about the Gruffalo? You're doing it wrong. You want to just keep it standard. It wouldn't predispose me to like that person. I wouldn't think, oh, yeah, cool, I'll talk to you. I'll buy your stuff. So what I like to try and do when I'm writing copy is try and switch that on its head a bit. And instead of talking about problems, turn the problem into a monster. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that. So this is an imaginary tax. I've never actually written any copy for a tax return software. Maybe I will do one day, who knows? So a traditional problem statement might be something like, getting your tax return wrong costs you thousands of pounds. TaxSoft helps you avoid costly mistakes. The problem, you're doing something wrong. Switch that on its head and say something like, thousands of people make this simple tax error every year. Make sure you're not one of them with TaxSoft. You're making your prospect, your customer, feel like they're being preyed on almost by this monster. It's not a mistake that they're making. It's a big thing that's affecting loads of people. And that makes them more predisposed, to be honest, to like you. And that's what you want. You want the people who are reading your copy to like you, because that makes them a lot more likely to do whatever it is you want them to do. So that's tip number 1. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. There is a lot more depth I could talk about on these, but I've only got 20 minutes and I've got a lot of tips. Number 2, and I'm trying to do this as best I can in this to fit everything in, is be concise. Now, a lot of kids' books have way too many words. They're long and wordy, and they tell you everything about everything. Julia Donaldson, who wrote The Gruffalo, is an absolute master of using the bare minimum of words to describe what it is that she's trying to tell you, to just paint that picture. And it's brilliant because it lets whoever it is you're reading to, the kid, fill in the gaps with their imagination. And that's wonderful, because as they get a bit older and they start reading books that don't have pictures and they start reading themselves, that imagination, that filling the gaps is really important. Now, you want to try and do the same thing with your copy. And the reason you want to do that is because people don't want to read it. It's true. Nobody actually wants to read your advert or your landing page. What they actually want is to defeat that monster they've got, to solve that problem. So all the fluff, all the words, all the guff, you need to cut it out because they don't want to read it. You want to make it get straight to the point of what they want, what the problem they want to solve. And again, I'll give you an example. TaxSoft is an enormously powerful suite of online tools designed by chartered accountants to supercharge and streamline your tax return process. If you run out of breath at the end of a sentence, it's probably too long. Now, what I like to do when I'm writing is I will write something like that initially. I'll do my crappy first draft, and then I'll go back and I'll cut words, and I'll cut words, and I'll cut words. And what I really like to do, every word, every sentence, is ask myself, from the point of view of the customer, the prospect, whoever, so what? And if I can't answer that question with a valid response, it gets cut out. So I would cut that sentence down. I would say, designed by chartered accountants. So what? What does that matter to me? I don't care. Supercharge and streamline. What does that even mean? That's just fluff words. Get it out. So I would cut it down to something simple like TaxSoft makes doing your tax returns easier, because that's the nub of it. That's what the person actually wants to know. They want to know what this software is going to do for them. Which leads me quite nicely on to tip number 3. Be specific. Now, the way that Julia Donaldson describes the Gruffalo, she picks on specific features and lets the illustrations and the imagination fill in the rest. He has terrible tusks and terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws. It's also an absolute joy to read out loud. And that specificity is really important when you're trying to be concise, because you want to be specific about the benefits, about what your product does, whatever. And there's kind of quite a few different ways you can do that. Using figures, using testimonials are really good. But one that I want to talk about particularly today, that again is often forgotten and people don't always remember to do, tell your audience what you want them to do. And what I mean by that is, if you want them to, for example, sign up to a newsletter, you might have a big long spiel of text, but actually a lot of people are going to scroll straight down to the bottom, straight down to the call to action. And if that call to action just says, click here, like this, for example, click here to sign up, then they've no idea what they're even clicking on. There's no use to that. So what I would try and do, and obviously I've made it a lot longer here, is change it to something like sign up to our newsletter for actionable copywriting insights to your inbox every Tuesday lunchtime. You're telling your user exactly what you want them to do, sign up to newsletter, and you're telling them exactly what they're going to get and when they're going to get it. You're being super specific so they know what to expect and they know how to get it. You're making their job easy, basically, which is what you want to do, right? The less they have to work, the more likely they are to do what it is that you want them to do. Which leads me on quite nicely on to tip number 4. And these two do dovetail together really nicely. So you want to be credible. And a couple of things I mentioned before about using specific figures. So for example, instead of saying hundreds of people use our software, 843 people have benefited from this software. People really like specific numbers, exact numbers. You also might want to, instead of just saying, we've got 800 5-star reviews, get those reviews in there. Tell people exactly what your customers have been saying about them. And again, the way that the mouse in the Gruffalo uses credibility is it's specific. So that's what convinces the other creatures, because again, you might not have read the Gruffalo, it's not actually real, except it is. So the mouse is telling all the other creatures about this Gruffalo to scare them away. Its specificity makes it credible. Now, another way that I really like to get credibility, and again, this is another one that people either forget or don't try, possibly because it's a little bit scary, is to really own your flaws. What I mean by that is, nothing is perfect. Nothing does everything. Everything has limits. So instead of talking about how wonderful your product is and some great hyperbolic statement about how it's the greatest thing in the world, talk about its limitations first. Talk about its flaws. By doing that, you enhance your credibility. There's research that shows that landing pages and adverts that talk about flaws before benefits perform better. So for example, TaxSoft is the ultimate tax return software, which is, it has no specificity. It's not hugely credible because there's nothing to back it up. It becomes, TaxSoft won't do your tax returns for you. The customer knows that already. Your customer probably already has an idea of what your product does, but it will make them a lot easier. it kind of pre-qualifies that second statement. Lawyers use it a lot as well. Again, there's research to show that lawyers that bring up flaws in their argument before their opponents do and then debunk those flaws do better at trial than those who don't. Tip number 5. I'm getting exhausted here. Talk about your user. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about how the Gruffalo isn't really about the Gruffalo. It's actually about the mouse. Now, the mouse is very specifically written to appeal to children, so children can identify with the mouse. It's a tiny little creature going through the woods, defeating all these big scary creatures just using its wits. And that's why children love it, because the book's basically, it's not about the mouse, it's almost about them. So you want to kind of, if you can do the same thing with your copy and make it personal and make it about the user rather than about you and your business, it makes it a lot more interesting to them. So again, I'm going to give you a little example. What I like to do is, when I've written the copy, I'll go through, and every time I've written our, or we, or where, or anything like that, change that sentence around. It'll take a little bit of a rewrite. It's a reframe rather than changing your message. I will change it so it has you or your in there. So our software simplifies tax returns becomes simplify your tax returns and save time. It's all about you. It's not saying anything new. It's not changing what you're talking about. It's just flipping that perspective a little bit to make it about the person you're talking to. And we're all quite self-centered at the end of the day, really. We're all reading this copy because we want something. So by making it about your user, you make it then far more likely to convert, which is what you want. We offer a lifetime warranty becomes you're protected for life. It's a lot more personal. Tip number 6, which again falls on quite nicely. I have tried to order these as well as I can do. Know your audience. Now, kids' books are actually pretty easy to write, but good ones really, really hard to write. Kids, not that discerning when it comes to books. If it's got a princess or a unicorn and maybe some little flaps in it, my little girl's happy. Doesn't care about the rhyme and the rhythm and how beautifully illustrated it is. So why does Julia Donaldson spend probably an awful lot of time and effort writing these wonderful, beautiful children's books? It's because she knows that kids aren't her only audience. It's the parents, because they're the ones who go out and buy the books. They're the ones who go on Amazon or read the reviews or whatever, and they're the ones who have to read the books out loud. So she makes them absolutely joyous to read out loud. And that's why, as you can see, she's worth 85 million quid for writing books that are about 700 words long. Not bad, right? She's a 4th best-selling author in the UK. And you kind of want to try and do the same thing when you're writing copy, and it'll depend what you're writing for. But the example I've used here is if you're selling a piece of software that automates note-taking in meetings, at different points in your funnel, you're going to want to be talking to different people. Your audience is going to change, and what they want to hear, what they need from that message is going to vary. So the admin assistant might be the first person you're appealing to because it's them who actually is going to be using it. They want to know how easy it is and how much time it's going to save them. But they're not actually going to be the person who's going to pay for it. They're going to have to escalate it up the chain, maybe to their team leader. And they're going to care about things like maybe how easy it is to use still, but how fast it is, how accurate it is, how quickly their people are going to get the notes in their inbox after the meeting. But they're not be the person who's going to pay for it either. They might need to take it to the head of finance who's thinking, wow, what's the return on investment? How much money is this going to save me? And in this example, you need to be thinking really carefully at every different part of that journey, every part of that funnel, because the head of finance might be thinking, well, if I can automate this, if I can automate all these bits as well, maybe I can cut my staffing. But that's not something that the admin assistant wants to hear. So you need to be, this is an extreme example, but that you need to be thinking really carefully and working with the rest of your marketing team to make sure that you're giving the right message all through your funnel. Excuse me. Number 7, curiosity. And I'm cheating a little bit here because this is actually more about the Gruffalo's child, the sequel to the Gruffalo, where the Gruffalo's daughter goes off in the middle of the night to try and find the big bad mouse from the first book that her dad's told her lots about. It's brilliant as well. You should read both of them. Anyway, curiosity is a really useful emotion to play into when you're writing copy because we are all curious. You probably remember a few years ago when BuzzFeed was absolutely massive and you used to get these wonderful clickbait headlines like this. Now, I'm not for a minute advocating that you start using clickbait. When you used to click on the BuzzFeed headlines, the title, the actual articles were almost always rubbish, but it didn't matter because you click through and you've been served the ads, and that's not what you're trying to do at all. But the way they structure the headlines is really clever, and it's a really useful thing to use. And what it is, it's something called the curiosity gap. So what it does is it gives you a little bit of knowledge, or just a little bit of knowledge that makes you want more. This man found a mysterious hatch in his basement. You won't believe what was inside. Usually it'd just be like a pair of socks or something. But you can use the same technique when you're writing your headlines. It's a brilliant headline technique to try and get people's interest and get them engaged and click through to read more and find out more about your products. And following on from that, a good way to use that to kind of build that curiosity gap is to use questions and loops. Questions, pretty self-explanatory. A loop is, so if you ask a question or you plant an idea in your reader's head, you're opening a loop. A user is much less likely to navigate away from your page or stop reading if you've got at least one loop open. So you try and keep one open all the time. Now, the Gruffalo itself, the title of the book and the cover, don't know why you can see that, is opening a loop in itself, because what's a Gruffalo? What's it got to do with this mouse? What's the story going to be? So before you've even picked up the book and started reading, Julia Donaldson's opened the loop. And the book is filled with loops. It opens loops and closes the loops within loops. And it's a really useful technique to use in your copywriting. For example, I did the same. I'm kind of going a little bit away from copy here. I opened a loop with the promotional materials for Power Hour by talking about how I was going to give copywriting tips based on the Gruffalo all over LinkedIn and on the promo, which hopefully some of you might have read and thought, well, what on earth is that? What's the Gruffalo? How is that going to work with copywriting? And I've already got your interest, and that's opening a loop. And hopefully by the end of this talk, that loop's going to be nicely closed off, and you'll be like, oh, that's brilliant, great talk. We're getting towards the end now. I can have a break, which would be brilliant. So number 9 ties quite nicely into the creative. And I've actually got 2 tips for number 9 because I just had too many to fit them in. So tip number 1 is always when you're writing your copy, make sure that you are working with your creative team and your creative people. And what I mean by that is, don't sit in your little copywriting silo and write your wonderful landing page or advert copy or whatever it is, and then come to your creative at the end and say, here you go. And they've created an absolutely beautiful design, but don't fit. So you've got to kind of shoehorn this copy into a design, into creative that it just doesn't work with. So bounce your ideas back and forwards all the time. So you're always working together. So you're all pulling together to create something that's a single unified piece of advert or whatever, rather than 2 things squished together that don't quite work. And the second thing I want to talk about when it comes to creative, don't say what you can show. So what I mean by that is, if you're selling, I don't know, a jumper, for example, lovely woolly jumper, don't spend loads of words talking about the beautiful pattern and how it fits, because you can show that in a photograph. Do describe that in your alt text, that's really important for accessibility, but not in your main copy. And you can then focus on the things that you can't show in a picture, so how comfortable it is, how warm it is, sustainability, whatever, the things that aren't visual. And that all comes back to, I think it's point number 2, about being concise. It's about giving your customer, your client, whatever, the information they need, but no more. So you don't want to be repeating yourself. You don't want to be saying the same thing twice. And finally, tip number 10, read it out loud. The Gruffalo is meant to be read out loud. It's a children's book meant to be read to children. And it's an absolute joy to read out loud. If you ask me afterwards, I might do your reading. I will do the voices as well. But it's a really useful thing to do when you're writing copy. When you've done you've drafted a few times, you've got something you're fairly happy with, sit and read it out loud to yourself, or even better, record yourself reading it and play it back. Because I guarantee you will find you stumble. You say it's a bit sound awkward, you run out of breath. And every time that happens, pause it, make a note, rewrite it, and keep going through, and it will get smoother and smoother and easier to read. And the easier it is to process, because your customer's probably not going to sit and read the copy out loud, but they will be able to read it almost effortlessly. And that's what you want. You don't want them to be having to work to get the information that's in your copy. You want it to be, oh, that's dead easy. And once you've done that, once you've recorded it, and you've got what you think is an absolute perfect piece of copy, get someone else to read it out loud. Because they're coming at it fresh. You've been looking at this for probably a week or so now, and it's all in your head. If you go to somebody else and get them to read it out loud, they're coming at it from a similar point of view to how your customer is going to be. So they are going to pick up any more trips and stumbles, any more awkward bits that you've left in that you're actually skipping over because you just know it so well. And that's it. 10 tips about how to write better copy from the Gruffalo. Like I said, I've got about 10 more. I'll be posting about these on LinkedIn, so give me a follow if you like. And if you do try any of these tips, I would absolutely love to hear from you, hear how it goes. Unless it goes really badly, in which case don't tell me. So yeah, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the speakers.